Once again, it is my pleasure to welcome you all to the Cox and Kings Chavag venue and also to introduce our next guests for our Writing Our Time session. Please welcome Karan, Mahajan and Manu Joseph.
Great, good evening. Thanks for being here and congratulations on the age of Trump. We are all extremely lucky people. I have a theory about why exists. I think Trump exists so that we can feel we are better than someone. I think that's what is going on. The point here is that I don't think any novelist could have achieved Trump as a character. And I'm also a journalist and a novelist. In this age, in these times, when I'm working hard on a novel, I feel it's such a waste of time and energy and intellect. Some days I do feel to focus on fiction, because most of the time it is not fiction. And I'm wondering why I'm claiming that I'm making all this up and why I'm staying away from journalism and facts when the world today is so interesting and information is so accessible. So Karan, let's start with this problem. Do you feel that you're doomed sometimes? On some days, do you get the sense of doom when you're working hard on a novel? Do you wish you were writing or you're working on a nonfiction?
Before I answer that, I just wanted to say thank you all for coming, and it's a real honor to be sharing the stage with Manu, who has very intelligent theories about Trump. My answer to that actually would be that, unlike you, I actually, in great desperation, want to escape into fiction. That's what the sensation that the age of Trump has created in me. I don't actually have any
profession. It's a moral profession. I can tell you a lot of you that it's a can question to are held responsible for Trump. But my point is that have we lost our influence over people, that a Trump can spin his own yarn and rise to become the president of what was once the civilized world?
Well, I don't think we've ever had any influence. I mean, if you look at Obama, right? Like Obama, recently in the New York Times, they had this article about, how he loves reading Naipaul and Barbara Kingsolver and Zadie Smith and Dave Eggers. Really has like the sort of taste that on Facebook, you would really feel proud of them for having read these books. But he himself, and I'm a big fan of Obama, but he himself was someone who authorized strikes, prolonged wars. And so if there's someone who's liberal and a good reader and a good writer, and they aren't altered by literature, I certainly don't think that someone on the right will. What I do think is more interesting is maybe...
No, that's because the real world is... I feel that you can be very righteous when you're within the realm of art, but when you're a president of a country, you can't be very charming, or you can't always do the right thing, or the things that humanities professors would approve of.
Right, and I think that when you said he spent what might happen during his inauguration speech, and for about 5 minutes he went on in this vein. He said, it might rain, it might not rain, there might be a downpour, who the hell knows what will happen, who cares? And he went on like this, talking about the rain. And I thought, wow, this is a very novelistic attention to detail, that he is obsessed with these tiny things. He has the pettiness that is actually required of a novelist in a certain sense, where you need to be able to capture the movements and gossip between people. But what he lacks that a novelist has is, I think, a sense of a larger narrative.
And the novel, because most of the novels, especially the literary novel, this is in the realm of righteousness and political correctness. And I know that most authors, when they want to state some things which are automatically somewhat unpleasant too, as a person you would not root for. So what Trump has done is that he has used political incorrectness, which is to get a lot of attention. A lot of themselves. But as a novel, accidentally, consciously does anything, and I think his intellect is on a novelistic technique to get a lot of attention. Just state things that people want to hear, but people are afraid to say.
Yeah, he's like a delinquent buffoon that you would find in a comic novel. So I think you're right in that. But to move away from Trump, actually, I had a question for you based on something you've said in an interview. Where, so Manu's second novel, I would really strongly recommend, The Illicit Happiness of Other People. And in that book, there is a character, Mariama, who's a mother character. And Manu says about her in an interview that he actually, the character is somewhat based on someone he knew in life, but he had to actually make this person milder to be more credible. And this is something I also heard in an interview with Adam Johnson, who won the Pulitzer Prize a few years ago for The Orphan Master's Son, which is a novel set in North Korea. And he has Kim Jong-il as a character in the novel. And what he said about that was that actually he couldn't include all of Kim Jong-il's craziness in the book, that he had to make Kim Jong-il more sane and more normal to bring him into a novelistic framework. So I'm interested in this question of whether in some ways, when the novel does start to address reality, it has to deform it in a certain way, and how you feel that happens in your books.
See, which is as a journalist or as a non-fiction writer, though I think non-fiction is a very ugly word to describe what is journalism. You are trying to define it by what it is not, which is very unfortunate. I mean, I think people should discover a more respectable word for non-fiction. But anyway, in journalism, when you have found a great moment in reality, or a great character who does something totally unusual, I mean, those are moments of triumph in journalism. In novels, what happens is that if a real character, and most characters are based on real characters, is very interesting. There is a problem of credibility with the novel. Like, for example, the character Karan is talking about, Mariama, was a woman I know and I used to know. She used to literally stand on one leg and wag a finger at the wall. She used to do many things. I mean, she had inhuman strength. She could lift things which most men couldn't. And unfortunately, I had to dilute her character because I know that readers will not believe me. And of course, sometimes I couldn't help myself. For example, I was not a very bright student, as you could have guessed. In school, what's the opposite of Ram? I had written as Sita in my school exam because I was a boy in Madras. I didn't even know something like Ram existed. So, but I had to bring this moment into my novel, and I know that a lot of people thought it's a funny thing. It was part of the unreal character of the novel, and even though they might appreciate it, they were dismissive of that moment as nothing very significant. He just made up a somewhat silly joke, But it was not. It was a part of my life, I didn't get any marks for that, but I became famous in the school for 30 minutes for that answer. So what happens in a novel is that constantly you are sometimes you're not making up stuff, then you're making up stuff. At the same time, you're worried that, is this convincing? Would people be convinced? And most of the time it's frustrating when you are dealing with reality and you are asking the same questions, is this convincing enough? I'm sure you would have faced the same kind of problems when you're dealing with very interesting reality which you have to dilute to be more convincing. Have you ever encountered that?
Well, I would offer a flip side in a way to what you said, which is that I think that so this panel is technically about, what is it? A misperception about the novel is that it is fundamentally dealing with reality. Actually, I think that the novel is laying out the patterns of his or her individual mind and how those patterns change over time. And what those patterns have in common is that they have a tone. They have a tone that gives the novel a unity. And the reality that ends up coming inside the novel then is reality that fits with that tone of mind. And so I think that's, in a sense, what you're saying about some of these anecdotes. And what I feel when reality starts coming in, it's not always the best or the most interesting story. It actually is the story that allows me to access certain hindered parts of my own brain. And I think it would be very different if you were writing a work of nonfiction about the subject you've written about, let's say, Madras in the 90s, or my novel is about Delhi in the mid-90s and early 2000s. The nonfiction, I think, would include the fact that Mariama lifts heavy objects, or in my novel, I might have included some more eccentricities to my characters as well. So yeah, I'm sort of interested in that.
Yeah. And Mariam also, there was a moment when she was coming back from the local store holding a coconut, and there was a girl walking in front of her, and a man in Madras, I mean, it used to be a very common occurrence. He just brushes against that young girl, and Mariama takes the coconut and throws it at the man, and it hits him, because unlike Bengalis, Malayalis have a very good aim. So walks away. And I put it in this moment, my childhood, that's what it is. And I was wondering if this was a non-fiction book about, say, Rajinikanth, and I was writing a moment of, I was writing a description of Madras, of my time, then it would have had a very different literary value. So that is the point, and I was trying to say, yeah, I agree with you what you're saying about reality. You can never escape reality. But I feel that there is a problem there, with the construct and the doom of the novel. Yeah.
Another sort of side point to that, and a question pertinent to this panel would be, the novel is an imported form, right? It's older examples of epics and so on, but the sort of bourgeois novel where you have individuals interacting comes from, let's say, Spain, or it comes from England. In what ways do you think it is not actually completely suited to capturing reality as Indian writers who are writing in English, but also in other languages where you have novels? Where do we feel this constriction, and what efforts does one have to make to break past them? And this could be a question of form or of tone.
Many things. The story, the idea of a story obviously is not imported. It is the literary novel, the modern literary novel, which is imported. But even there, I feel that now when you write in Indian languages, but sometimes there would be an omnipotent angle. You would not know which character, who's the narrator. You would never know, and that was never really important for Indian way of writing a novel or writing a very long. To be from the recently, about 2 or 3 years ago, I was in a very unpleasant panel because I got into a fight with another writer.
I hope we get into a fight.
I'm extremely careful about fights these days. Yeah. So he, someone from the audience made the observation that there is no story in most of these modern English novels. That they want to read a story and they don't get to read a story, and actually I agree with that. And so I was of the view that if you want to claim that what you're writing is a novel, then I think the unspoken deal between you and the reader is that you do tell a story. But most of the time the story, and the story has become a farce. So you have many other things to say. So the person from the audience wants to say is like, why do you, if you don't want to tell a story, why are you calling it a novel? Just say it's something else, and it's your stream of consciousness about an orange, you know. So why do you want to tell me that you're going to tell a story while you really are not telling a story? So I feel that basically, I think even among good writers, there are storytellers, and though there are very good writers who probably can't tell a story, you know. And I think every writer tries to overestimate what they are good at. So writers who are very good at storytelling would like to believe that the novel is about the story, while writers who can't figure out how to tell a story would probably think of more literary reasons to write a novel.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. And I have also found, when talking about sort of the Western form, that there's a conflation of the individual with the novel, I think, in the West. There's a lot of novels that are about one character or character's perspective. And I actually had to deal with this on a personal, because the book that I loved the most when I was in New York, whose wife has left him for his best friend, and he starts going crazy and writing letters to everyone, to dead presidents, to dead philosophers, to friends, to relatives, to all sorts of things. And it is 400 pages really inside the mind of one character. And I was trying to use the form of that novel to write a book set in Delhi about a couple who lose their children in a small, quote-unquote, small bombing in Lajpat Nagar market. And I wanted the father of these children to sort of be walking around thinking about what had happened and his grief and so on. And a very interesting thing happened, which is that for 3 or 4 years, I couldn't write at all. Actually, it was a complete mismatch of form with content. Like I couldn't understand what was going on and why it was depressing me so much. And then one day I threw it all away and I started writing exactly as I wanted to. And what I found was the thing that you said is what happened, which is that I suddenly was in a perspective where I was entering anyone's mind that I felt like, that I was not constrained by one person. And it turned out that I actually don't subscribe to that kind of super individualism, having grown up in a society like this. Members, before, I think that I'm actually more adept at entering the minds of other people than knowing who I am myself. And I found that engine actually started to come into the work. And it was much more
provokes
freeing.
me to ask, I think, a very amusing question, which I think is important, but every time I've asked this question, I get a very dignified chuckle like which you just delivered, which is, how do you get into the mind of women characters? How do women writers get into the mind of male characters? Is it authentic? Is it even possible? How do you do it?
I think knowing a few women is helpful as a good place to start. And then after that, you know, but no one is that different from you. In fact, that's what the novel is premised on, right? That you're hoping that whatever weird stuff is going on in your brain, there's actually a million other people who feel the same way as you, and they'll pick up your book and feel a sense of camaraderie or of connection. So I don't see why that's not true while writing across religions or across sexes. But yeah, I would like to hear your thought on this. I mean, clearly you've given this some thought.
That was my question that absolves me from answering. Anyway, I'm always fascinated because my favorite American writer, Ann Tyler, I mean, she's such a good writer, and but then and then I see that with this observing, very very dirty and everything else, and I was like, okay, this is not the kind of guy she's trying to portray, you know. And for the first 80 pages, he's not even thinking about sex. I mean, 80 pages, you know. I was like, yeah, right, you know. So I was not very convinced, you know. But then, of course, I'm told. I mean, don't be stupid. I mean, not all men are sensitive. What do you know? Oh, and it's like that. I didn't know you had to lie so much in a novel, you know. And when I wrote Serious Men, it was about a man who lived in a chawl, and I knew those men intimately because I lived in a chawl for three years in Bombay. And so this guy is on Wadli Sea face observing women who are beautiful, and eloquent, who are unattainable. It is a very unpleasant thing what is going on inside his head. And when I write that, I was amazed at the reaction and how this man is sexist. The character is sexist. I mean, that also means the novelist is sexist, you know. So how can this kind of description be possible? Do you have any idea what goes on inside the mind of, you know, a man who's from a Bombay chawl? And then a more sophisticated description of the man was subaltern, you know, and I thought of Iron Money, my lead character in series. Subaltern, you know, that is what, I think that is the official definition of that term. But anyway, I feel that not only gender, but also class, you know, cross, you know, I feel that, I do feel that the most underrated, the ability to guess, gone through an experience to write very well about that moment or a particular kind of, I think people don't talk about the importance of conjecture. I think that is pure talent. I think everything else is upbringing and what you've read and everything else. But that intuition and conjecture, yes, but even so, that gender is a very big problem. And I see that in the books that I read.
Well, I think another thing that you and I do in our books is we try to make everyone equally awful. So we're not making anyone better than anyone else.
With you, yeah.
And I also think that, as you said, I've heard people say this too, the men in your novel are so nasty. And I always say, well, you clearly have not met any actual men. And to me, that was the one very revelatory thing about the Trump, to bring it back to Trump, that should be talked about more for the simple fact that it should be revealed. Yeah. But of course, we didn't realize then that that awfulness would actually lead to Trump becoming president. So maybe we don't really understand reality at all.
We'll open the session to questions from the audience.
Yeah, the lady in the back.
Hello. Hi. So I just had a couple of questions. So you were talking about how some of your...
Sorry, we can't
can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just wanted to talk to you about... both of you referred to how sometimes the characters in your books are based off of real people that you meet in real lives. And as a writer, and as having had writer friends, I'm constantly worried about how they would see me. Would I ever appear in one of their writings? And as such, do you think, is there a sort of invasion of privacy that everybody should expect when interacting with writers? Is that a given?
Yeah, see, it depends on what you've done to your writer friends. Okay, that would greatly inform the extent to which you're portrayed. Like, for example, even in J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter, you can see that some of the figures have been very mean to her. You know, you can just immediately see. But then, yeah, sometimes there'd be a nose or ears or hair here and there. You know, fragments. On the question of privacy, I mean, I'm so sorry. I mean, you should be kidding. You know. It's like this. I feel that, journalistic photographers, I've seen them insult a corpse on the road or, or victims of great calamities by the mere act of taking their photographs. And when you're talking to writers, that's exactly what happens to you. You know, everything is recorded, and I think most things will be used. So that's how it goes.
I'll just add quickly to that. Never hurt a writer. Everyone who's in my books is someone who's hurt me in some way. And I don't actually want to put them in there. They just come out. And the other thing I'm reminded of is Picasso made a painting for Gertrude Stein at one point. And it was, a classic Picasso, like a sort of square face, like looking very weird. And Gertrude Stein said, "But this doesn't look anything like me at all." And Picasso said, "This is how you will look."
So I read your book, Serious Men, when I was visiting Tata Institute. And it was clearly about this institute that you wrote. All the faculty were not amused by it at all. And all the students loved it. So, so my question is, did you actually infiltrate this ivory tower somehow? I mean, how do you...
Yes, I did. That was one of the perks of being a journalist. I was with the Times of India then. And at that point, I was world of literature and actually it's firmly in the hold of science. And again, this is something which many people don't want to accept. And I think the true philosophers of our time are probably scientists. Even others, but the most influential philosophers, even though they're not called philosophers anymore, they're scientists. And I also realize they get away with a lot of bullshit because the world is not scientific in its thinking. And like even recently, they said they've detected gravitational waves. And we all have to accept it. While the truth is that they have no idea what gravity is. Even today, scientists don't know what gravity is. But they've spent, I think, $300 billion on a gadget to detect gravitational waves, but I'm fairly confident that they're not very sure about it. I'm a BA English literature student, okay, and it's my analysis that they have not figured out anything about gravitational waves. I think it's just a hunch, but I won't be able to substantiate it, obviously. There's no way I'm going to sit next to an astrophysicist or anybody and make this point. I can just say it in jest, right? But anyway, at that time, I was very interested in the role of science in storytelling. But because I was with the Times of India, I could call up any institute and say that I'm working on a story on string theory or something like that, and go and meet them, go early, just look around, walk around. Though I did do those stories, and even the scientists of the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research were very confused by Times of India, so interested in string theory, but they were very touched. That nobody is interested in what we do, but look at this journalist who's done 2 stories.
Have they allowed you back in there again?
No, I've not tried, but I hope they do. It's a beautiful campus.
Yeah, the lady there.
Yes, this is about political. Nastiness goes is.
Then we're suggesting?
Political correctness thing is taken too far, and probably the extent to which West is adhering to political correctness is a type of.
Get your question. I think that to me, I think political correctness is a good force. And I've lived a lot in the U.S. and I've benefited from it, from the fact that there isn't really in the 10 years I've been there, like very little open racism, almost never anyone saying anything to me, and it creates an atmosphere of comfort. And also, I am of the belief that just like the right has pushed the discourse to the far right with far right ideology, the left should, I don't believe in being a centrist outside my novels. I think we should be on the extreme left to push things to the left. So in that sense, I am in favor of that kind of political correctness.
See, I feel that political correctness is a form of cowardice. We should not confuse decency with political correctness. We should be decent human beings when we are living what is called life. When we are in a society, when we are in roles as spouse or whatever, But when we are communicating, when we are being writers, when we are being artists, and when we are being journalists and columnists, I think that truth is more decent than political correctness. Sometimes, but I think that it will be that Trump is a consequence only because of the oppression of political correctness. And have no doubts, political correctness is also a form of oppression. And many kinds of writers who've tried to state a few things which are unpleasant to the liberals have faced it, and they face it, and it's quite severe, But at the same time, what's experiencing it? There are people because of that, and for some, this is, I've encountered the people know that, they submit that, but if nobody is even going to speak, nobody is even going to touch upon those subjects which are unpleasant, I think that's when writers become unpopular, and that's when you lose influence.
Yeah, the gentleman in the front.
my question to Manu, you have been consistently writing about home and activism. And at one
Hope.
home.
Home.
That's right. Oh, sorry, it's the problem with Mike, not my accent. So, anyway.
See, you're
so-
talking to a Malayali. I have no moral judgments about anybody's actions.
So you have said one point of time that home is a village of mind, and then you wrote something, and later on, in one sentence you say it thwarts intellectual infidelity. So I was always debating whether it's intellectual fidelity or intellect thwarted.
That is?
You said intellectual infidelity that's thwarted by the concept or idea of home.
Okay, that home is intellectual infidelity.
Infidelity, that the intellectual.
I don't remember this particular expression, but you're completely right. I mean, I've been very obsessed with the idea of home. Okay. Idea of home, was that high for you or me? It's a very beautiful woman. In fact, my next novel is about activism and home. I feel that what is going on right now in the world, the political, you can talk about politics of it, you can talk about culture. People have to accept the fact that home is coming back in a very populism, you can call what do you want. But the idea of home, is coming back, and home is more important than ever for people. In fact, it might seem so obvious now, but let's not forget, even 20 years ago, the idea of drifting, being rootless, the idea of being rooted, where do I belong, what is home, those things. That's the only reason why people live in Gurgaon, where I live, where it's a gas chamber. But still, and all these people, they can actually be in California if they want it. And it always, why are you here? That home is greater than even clean air sometimes, but that has its own corruption because it's such a powerful emotion. It has its own corrupting factors. Now, activism, to me, activism is one of my favorite subjects, where, especially left activism, I feel that it is as bad as right-wing activism. Okay, all the symptoms and all the forms of behavior, they're all the same, but because it is within the moral construct, and most of the time, that kind of activism just gets away with a lot of things. Ultimately, the most important point is that activism emerges from a certain elite discomfort with something, and then they just assign the battle to the suckers, and then people think they are in the middle of a movement. It is not. From Kashmir to, of course, I've been annoying my Kashmir friends for a long time. I just stopped doing that. But all kinds of movements are, I think, sponsored by the elite because they want to change things for their own ends. And I feel that it's the duty of journalists to point that out instead of just falling into that trap. Sorry, Karan, would you like to?
So,
Okay. We're done, yeah. Yeah. Should we take one last question or?
yeah, one
Okay, last question.
from the back. The lady in the back there, yeah. Yeah, the one who's standing up. Can give it.
This is about your point about male writers writing female characters.
Can you speak louder?
Can you hear? So this is about your point about male writers writing female characters and vice versa. I was thinking of this novel which I read recently, Hanya, A Little Life, and it has 4 men who are so sensitive and so in touch with their feelings and everything. I loved the book, but do you think they are credible male characters?
Yeah, that's us. That's based on Manu and me. I actually met her recently. She's a wonderful person. I haven't read that book, so I can't actually speak to that. But someone needs to write nice things about men sometimes. And if a woman is willing to do that, more power to her. Thanks.